Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my June wrap-up. I read 11 and a half books in the month of June. I did have one DNF, so that is that half of a book there, but all in all, it was a really good reading month. June was definitely the most diverse month that I had in terms of new to me authors and also just different genres, so I'm excited to get into it, and I'm just gonna go from my least liked books to my favorite book of the month. So the first book that I'm gonna talk about is my DNF, and unfortunately that is going to be Steel Crow Saga by Paul Kruger. I actually was really loving this one, but found out some very unsavory things about the author on Twitter, and personally I cannot separate that art from the artist, so I gave it a DNF. It was an intriguing premise, but also one that I can find from a less problematic author, I'm sure, so DNF to that one. The next book that I am going to talk about is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Now, I did initially find this book as a good resource for further anti-racism education, but I didn't realize that the author was white, and after finding out that she was white and kind of reflecting on maybe who I should be using as a teacher for that space, I don't know if I would recommend this one. So while I do think this is informative, I do have to agree, and I understand the fact that it is kind of part of the issue that we're talking about in terms of racism, that a book by a white woman is the best-selling book and the most suggested book at the moment. It was highly suggested to me. I picked it up. I thought it was like informative, but I do think it was informative. I do get the criticisms about why this shouldn't be the only book that you pick up, and it's not going to be the only book I pick up on this subject. But that was my continuing education book that I read this month. And truthfully, why it's so low on this list, because I was engaged during this book. I did think about a lot of things during this book, but I also found a lot of free resources online, just of Own Voices experiences or even different articles and think pieces online that did have the same sort of points that were addressed in this book. So I definitely think it's information that you can get anywhere. And overall, this definitely could have been condensed down into an article, especially because I don't really know if it is our sphere as a white person to be writing a book about this issue. The next book that I read this month was Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey. I really enjoyed this, and my biggest critique was that it was very short. I didn't realize from the premise of this novella that it was going to be just like a 4-hour long audiobook, so I was very disappointed when it ended. So I guess that is also a good thing, because Sarah Gailey's writing, their writing is beautiful, and I really enjoyed it. I was engrossed from beginning to end. The characterization that they are able to pack into such a small piece of work is outstanding. I've read larger books that don't have the amount of characterization as this does, so I am interested to see if Sarah Gailey has any longer form books available, because I did really like their writing style, but I just really wanted more out of this story. This is about a group of librarians in a futuristic society where a lot of the United States has reverted back to the lawlessness of the Wild West, and they are champions of bringing information and other things to different people around the continental US in this new dystopian normal. So it was a really intriguing idea. I really loved the character work here and the plot work. I just felt like it wrapped up way too soon. I would love to see more from this world, I guess. This dystopian future was really interesting, and you know, there's only so much that you can get in such a small form book. The next book that I have on my list is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I really wish this would have been higher on my list, but alas, this was kind of a letdown for me. This was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and it was honestly just a middle-of-the-road book. This is very much inspired by, or like a very similar story to, Haunting of Hill House, the TV show, and that is, like, I consider it one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite pieces of film, I guess. I love the TV show. This just didn't do it for me, and I think that was because in the back of my mind I was comparing. There are a lot of things that are very, very similar, so I wouldn't be surprised to find out that Riley Sager may have used that as some inspiration but this is about a girl named Maggie, and her parents, when she's very young, move into a haunted house. They don't know it's haunted, but they move out in a span of about 20 days, and her father writes a tell-all much like the Amityville horror house, and they get really famous off of it. But Maggie has lived her whole entire life kind of feeling like her parents are liars. She doesn't remember anything about her time in the house, and when her father dies and leaves the estate to her, she goes to renovate it, fix it up, sell it for a profit, and also try and figure out some answers as to what really happened, because she does not believe that the ghosts exist, and she wants to figure out what really made her family flee the house in 20 days. This is dual timeline paranormal thriller about a haunted house. You do have a book within a book because you get to read her father's story as well. So if you're interested in any of that, I still would recommend this book if you're a diehard Riley Sager fan. This would also probably be a good one to start out with because his writing is the same as it is in all of his other books, but there were some things that I feel like were done better in his other works. So if you read this and really enjoy it, then you'll love everything else that Riley Sager does. I do think this is a good introduction to him. It's a good blend of a paranormal thriller. Mild spoilers here if you really care. I don't think it is, but mild spoiler. It was less on the paranormal side than I was expecting and what we were led to believe, but that's just the way it goes sometimes with paranormal thrillers. So that was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. The next book that I read this month was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, and this was so lighthearted and fun. I actually saw the writer. She had a thread of tweets that I saw on Twitter, so that's why I picked up this book. It wasn't on my radar. I don't normally read YA contemporary romance books, but the author intrigued me, the pitch for this book intrigued me. This was very enjoyable. It does talk about some issues, for example, being queer in a small town, being Black in a Midwest small town, and it also deals with different illnesses, such as her main character's mother and brother have sickle cell, and the main character herself has severe anxiety that she suffers from. All of this was discussed in a way that was very meaningful, very impactful, very relatable, but it was still a lighthearted story about a girl who meets a girl and falls in love without being bogged down by that. And I don't say bogged down as in those are bad things, but I thought this book had an excellent balance of talking about these deep issues while still being a book celebrating joy. Our main character, Liz, is one of the only Black kids in her small Indiana town, and she has dreams of moving away from the town, becoming a musician. Her dreams, she thinks they're dashed when she does not get the college scholarship she was banking on, but then she enters into a race to become prom queen in order to win that crown and also get scholarship money that is promised to the prom king and queen. I just thought this was really lighthearted and wonderful. The plotline is very fun and lighthearted, while again, I said talking about more serious issues, and I really enjoyed it because while at first glance this does kind of sound tropey, it's not. You think you might know just reading the synopsis what you're getting when you're going into this book, but it doesn't. It explores so much more, even the main relationship between Liz and her girlfriend. There's a lot of nuance to that and just different explorations of that, and I just love seeing more representation all across the board in books like this. Younger me would have really loved to read a character like Liz, and I'm really grateful that young adults now, or I guess it's not middle grade, but it very much reads younger than YA, but I only usually read YA fantasy, but this was really enjoyable, and it has so much important rep, Black rep, queer rep, anxiety rep, dealing with like loss of loved ones while not having that like overtake your life. This was wonderful. This is also a debut book, and it totally doesn't feel like one. This is such a polished book. I loved it. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Devolution by Max Brooks. This is a book about Bigfoot, and it is done in like a found footage sort of way. I listened to this on audiobook, and that is the way that I would suggest you go into it, because it definitely heightened my love of this book. The audiobook is a full cast. It feels like a found footage movie, and Nathan Fillion and Judy Greer are some of the characters in it. It was such a fun reading experience for me. It wasn't scary. I was hoping for a little bit of scare factor, but again, knowing what else Max Brooks has written, it was bound to be more like tongue-in-cheek social commentary while using some horror tropes in it, so I wasn't scared by this one, but I was entertained. I enjoyed the story. The narration is phenomenal. It is such a wonderful production. Like I said, it does feel like sort of a found footage type of ordeal because you're going through different documents, finding out what happened to this settlement of people who move into the mountains on the west coast of America, and no one knows where they are now. Found footage movies are my favorite horror movie, and I absolutely love audiobooks with full cast narrations, so I really loved this one, and I definitely think it's one that I probably wouldn't have enjoyed as much had I read it physically, so definitely give this a try if you're looking for great audiobooks. This was definitely like the best produced audiobook that I've read all year long. The next book that I'm going to talk about is The Deep by River Solomon. This is a very hard novella to try and explain. I would recommend you listen to this on audiobook because it does feel like a very oral tradition story. It feels like you're sitting around a campfire and you're listening to someone tell you a story. It's a very wonderful lyrical listening experience and reading experience. The prose is very beautiful, and it explores generational trauma, and it is about mermaids, but these mermaids are the descendants of pregnant African women thrown off of slave ships when African people were being taken to the New World to be sold into slavery. Like that synopsis suggests, this does deal with some very heavy topics, but it is very beautifully done. It's very haunting in a very good way. I've seen this marketed in a lot of places as a horror book. I don't know why it's there at all. This isn't horror. This is definitely literary fiction. It's written in a very literary style. I absolutely loved it, but please don't go into it thinking it's gonna be like Into the Drowning Deep or something like that with like killer mermaids. The horrors in this book that are discussed are very real, and just is used in a different type of trope to explore it without just exploring generational trauma that Black people do actually have. So I thought this was a very wonderful listen. I do believe Rivers Solomon has at least one other book. I think it's a sci-fi. The title is escaping me, but I'm interested in picking that one up of theirs as well. The next book that I read this month was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. My biggest complaint with this was I do wish that I had read it as a child. It does still hold up. This edition that I have has wonderful illustrations, and this is a middle grade, and while I do absolutely love Coraline, and I think that does hold up and anyone from any age can read it, and I did really enjoy this one, I couldn't help but notice when I was reading it how much my childhood self would have enjoyed this more. Like, this was exactly everything that I enjoyed as a younger, I'd say maybe 10 to 12 years old. This doesn't really have so much of a plot as I was expecting it to. It's about a young boy whose family is all killed except for him, and he escapes into a graveyard, and the ghosts in the graveyard take him in as their own and raise him. And this is told, each chapter is sort of a different snapshot into his life. There's not really a linear storyline, which did bother me a little bit more as an older reader, and as a kid I really would have loved that. There were also some things in here where you don't really get the explanation that I was craving, but I knew that as a kid, like, you take in these concepts and you just accept them. You can definitely suspend your disbelief more as a kid, so while I think a child that age would have absolutely loved this, sometimes I was going, well, why? Let's see some more character, like, let's see some more world building and concept building, because there were a lot of cool concepts that were never really explained in here, or explained as well as I wanted them to, but this was absolutely beautiful. So really, I mean, my biggest takeaway and my biggest regret for this one is that I did wait so long to read it and didn't get a chance to read it when I was the target age for this book. But this is one that I am definitely keeping around for my future kids one day, because I think that this explores some darker topics and darker themes, because it does start with his family getting murdered, but it's off page. It's not very gruesome at all, but it does talk about different topics such as your legacy, or people remembering you after you're gone, or what happens when you die. A lot of questions that kids might have that this book talks about really well. And then that's a perfect segue for my next book, which is also a book geared towards young children, talking about difficult topics, and that's Will the Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doherty. She is Ask a Mortician on YouTube, and she basically took questions from kids about death and dying, funerals, all of that, and she answers their questions honestly but with humor, and I really loved this. I'm clearly not the target demographic. It is meant for children, and as a way to explore those tougher topics, it is something that we as humans are naturally drawn to and curious about and wonder about. I mean, it's one of life's biggest questions, is what happens after we die, and definitely society, especially in the United States, kind of beats it out of us until, you know, we don't talk about it. It's a taboo, and it's just kind of this unspoken scary thing that happens. So I really loved this. Is it weird to say it was delightful? I just think, you know, kids are smarter than we give them credit for. This definitely didn't dumb anything down, but explained so many things perfectly, and for younger children to understand. Children have those questions, and I think it's a lot more helpful to confront that and have honest discussions about what happens when we die, what happens to our bodies, just things, scientific facts. The questions range from anything, will the cat eat my eyeballs, to what happens if I die in space. So it's a very engaging read. It's very interesting. It answers a lot of questions. It's definitely written in an easily accessible format because it is for children, and it was like touching at times too. So this was a really fun read as well. I picked it up on a whim, and I'm really glad I did because it's an oddball little book. Definitely trigger warnings for it. I mean, it talks about death for about 5 hours, so if you don't want to talk about that, I totally get you, don't pick it up. But if you do want to, you know, get to know more, I think Caitlin is such a wonderful resource, just in the way she talks about death and dignity of death, and a lot of her ideas have just really been things that have resonated with me and just got me thinking. So I've read all 3 of her books this year and have absolutely loved them, and I just really love her perspective on death and dying and the death industry and how we as humans handle death. So I really enjoyed reading this one. The next book is another debut that I was really looking forward to, and that was Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. Now this was marketed, to me at least, or I'd been hearing a lot of people describe it as kind of a love child between Bunny by Mona Awad and Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I loved both of those books, and I loved this book. If you hated either of those books, don't pick this up, because this is wonderful. It has the best aspects of those, where it really does feel like a fever dream. You don't know what's happening a lot of the time. This is dark academia, where a student goes to Catherine House, a school where you essentially cut yourself off from humanity for the time it takes you to graduate there, and the school's emphasis is if you do cut yourself off completely from society, except for people who are within the school, you will get a better learning education, a better learning environment, and they do set you up there. They have a really good alumni network, and you're set up if you choose to go to this very strange college setting, and that's all I'm going to give you. It's a wild ride. I listened to this on audiobook, which was both really good and really bad, because sometimes I had to pause and really think, like, what's happening here, but in a good way. This is very much all atmosphere and character and ideas and feelings and themes, and not so much plot. It's very meandering. It takes place for all 4 years of the main characters going to Catherine House, and there are a lot of time jumps. I think a lot of people are going to be very confused by this. I don't think this is a book for everyone, but like I said, if you enjoyed Bunny, if you enjoyed Ninth House, if you enjoy really dark things that have more of a focus on characters and themes and atmosphere over plot, then you're gonna love this one. I highly recommend, and I am so intrigued to find out what this author publishes next, because this is just a wonderfully written book. The next book that I read is a reread, and also one I feel like I don't need to talk too much about, but that was The Shining by Stephen King. This is one of my favorite Stephen King books. And I just really wanted a nice quality reread for this month. I really love it. I love this book better than the movie. I think it's a more engaging story where you can actually follow a character who is very flawed and trying to do the best by his family. If you've seen the movie and not read the book, I would recommend you picking it up. It is a lot slower of a journey, but there is a lot more inner conflict within the main character of this book, because Jack Torrance really wants to do right by his family. Don't feel like I need to talk much more about it. So that was The Shining. Highly enjoyed it. It was a reread. I knew I was going to absolutely love this one. And that brings us to my absolute favorite book of this month, and that was The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. I could go on all day about this book. I love this series. Unless something terribly weird happens with The Burning God, where it doesn't read like the other two books, or, you know, weird things happen with the plot, like something very, very bad has to happen for me not to have this book series as one of my favorite series of all times now. I read The Poppy War, really enjoyed it, picked up The Dragon Republic when I was having a really bad day, because I was originally going to save it for closer to November when the third book, The Burning God, comes out. I read this in one day. This is over 600 pages. I could not put this down. This, to me, was better than The Poppy War, which is strange because normally in trilogies, the third anything, the third movie, the third book, I don't tend to like it. It's usually my least favorite. It's usually one of my complaints about middle things is, oh, it's such a middle book, because usually, you know, you've got the beginning, you've got the middle where everything goes to shit, and then you have the end where it's resolved, hopefully. This was just wonderful, and a lot of bad things did happen. Shit went down in this book, but I was here for it. It was so engaging. The world building is expanded even more. There are new themes introduced into this book. If you are looking for a grim, dark, Asian-inspired fantasy that deals with themes of autonomy and a nation's right to rule, racism, colonialism, just all of that. A war fantasy with a very unlikable protagonist that you really want to root for, and you can tell there's so much character growth. I absolutely loved this. I loved it. I am not one for fantasies that are primarily war-based, but this just has so many good discussions of this nation is torn apart after a series of wars, and the first book is them going to war again, and there's just a bunch of discussions further expanded on in here about these nations that come in and invade other nations, and or come in and help them and send in missionaries and all that, and then when stuff starts getting bad in the country, withdraw and mess up that country even more, and then to kind of use that against that country and say they're not as civilized, or they shouldn't be able to rule themselves because of all this turmoil. There's a lot of big things discussed in here, and I love Rin. She is such a wonderful character. There's so much growth between this book and the first book. In the first book, she's a very selfish, ambitious person. This one, you're starting to see her realizing there are bigger causes worth fighting for. In the first book, she's just trying to get out of poverty. She's just doing whatever she can to create a better life for herself. And in this one, she's kind of learning more that there are bigger things worth fighting for, and there are people worth fighting for. I love this series, and I cannot wait for The Burning God, although I actually also can, because R.F. Kuang has been tweeting about it and like giving apologies for her readers, and I've been seeing so many of her mentioned tweets and people saying like what a mess they are after it. So I'm not ready for it, but I am ready for it. And R.F. Kuang is in the middle of writing like a dark academia book, and that just has my heart so happy because I love dark academia and I love this writer, and I loved it. If you haven't already picked up The Poppy War, I know it got a lot of hype last year. Definitely look into it. It's very graphic. There are a lot of triggering things going on because it does deal with civil unrest and war in a country, but this is just perfection. Perfection. I loved it, and I'm very sad that I read it in a day, because now I just have to wait for November for R.F. Kuang to probably break my heart. So yeah. So that is going to be it for my June wrap up. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, comment, subscribe for more content from me. I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye!